Katharine Birbalsingh is the new chair of the Social Mobility Commission. In her inaugural speech today, she said that Britain is too focused on the rags to riches dream, and people in the poorest parts of society do not need to aim for an Oxbridge education. Katharine's also known as Britain's strictest headmistress. Leading a school called the Michaela Community School in a deprived area of London, her methods are often seen to be controversial. I spoke to her a short time ago. Katharine, thanks for joining us on the show today. Today you set out your vision for Britain and social mobility, or the government's new social mobility czar. But before we get on to all of that, I wanted to talk to you about education, because for viewers that don't know you, you are branded now as the country's strictest head teacher. I don't know if you love or loathe that or just find it a bit bemusing. But let's start off talking about education. There was a documentary on ITV about you and your school. And at the start of this documentary, one of your colleagues says it's not like North Korea. But those unused to your beliefs about education might think it did look a bit like North Korea. So can you explain to the viewers why it's not?
Because the place is just filled with love, you know. The children are happy, the staff are happy, the staff love seeing the children. I see them for assembly every single day. In fact, I do 7 assemblies a week, you know, because we've got 7-year groups. There's just a real sense of purpose. We all know why we're there. We're there because we want to achieve and give the children the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to make the most of their lives and to enable social mobility for our children, because we're in the inner city with children coming from a variety of different backgrounds, and we want to give them the best chances that they can have in life, really.
And just, you know, for people that haven't seen the documentary or know about your school, I mean, it is really strict. So there's no talking in corridors. I think there's a line along the corridor.
Yeah.
If you drop your pencil, you get a detention.
Well, if you were to not bring your pen in, you would get a detention. If you're dropping your pencil, that's fine.
That's fine. but I'm trying to get across, it's really, really strict, and it's unusually strict compared perhaps with other state schools. Why do you do it like that?
Yeah, well, the thing about strict is that people tend to think that must mean that you're mean. But actually, I would say that it means you love the children enough to keep your standards high for them. So the pen is a good example. You need to bring a pen into school. They're all taught to make sure that they're packing their bags the night before. They've all got the same pencil case with the same pens. So there's real consistency, and those same pens are expected for 5 years. So they have 2 black pens, a blue pen, a 2B pencil. And they know exactly what they need to be in there. So in that sense, it's relatively straightforward. But then even if they do forget it, some of the children run a little shop in the morning where they sell pens for 10p. So you can always pick up a pen in the morning if you've forgotten it.
And Katharine, what do you do with kids that can't do it or won't do it? Or do you believe that it isn't that kids can't do this?
They can.
Can't adhere to your rules, I mean.
I mean, they all manage it. The key thing is to remember that children have agency and they can choose whether or not they want to do something.
What do you do with kids? What do you do with kids with special educational needs or kids with ADHD, kids that might not be able, because of their own issues, to focus in the way that you require them to focus in class? Do you have separate rules for them, or do those children have to conform, or do they not fit into the school?
Well, we have a normal intake of inner-city children, so we have a variety of children with different issues. I would say, I mean, there are a few children you might need to slightly adapt for, but I would say that too often we allow labels to force us to lower our expectations of children, and that they could achieve a lot more if we just allowed ourselves to believe in them, despite the fact that they might struggle. So if they struggle in something, you might have to give them some support in getting there to be able to meet those standards. Some children don't require much support, and some children require more support. But the key thing is to believe that they can do it.
There has been a sense from others in the teaching community that you're kind of implicitly criticising other teachers or other schools that do it differently to you. What do you say to that, Katharine?
Well, if you can do things however much you like, as long as you're doing right by the children. I mean, what I mean is, Do you go to the school and visit and think the children are well behaved, they're learning lots, have they got great GCSE results, are the children happy, are they loved? If that's the case, then brilliant. But if that's not the case, then, well, we ought to be critical of those schools, shouldn't we? I mean, shouldn't we as a society say, that's not good enough, come on, you've got to do better? Now, the thing is, there are some schools in genuine difficulty that are trying very hard to get better, and that's brilliant. But there are other schools that are ideological in their position, that don't want to change because they don't believe that children can do better.
What do you mean by that, ideological in their position?
Well, for instance, they would find our strict rules offensive. They don't like that idea. But then if it's pointed out that, but look, there's lots of chaos here in this school, perhaps it would be better if you had more rules, they don't want to do that. And I would be critical of that.
You know, you spoke at the 2010 Conservative Party conference and you became kind of an emblem, if you like, of traditional ways of teaching. I mean, some of your fellow teachers make this point about you when they're asked about you, that you're an excellent teacher, clearly, with great ideas to offer, but you have become sometimes like a weapon in a culture war in which what you've just said about different methods of teaching that other parents or teachers might like, somehow you're critical of those and that becomes a culture war. What do you think about that? Do you disagree with that, or do you not mind, or do you think it's okay?
Well, I think that we all need to have high standards for all of our children. And there are children right now in classrooms with very poor behaviour who aren't able to learn. And I'm the chair of the Social Mobility Commission. I believe very much in social mobility for all of our children. And if there are children who aren't able to be upwardly mobile because of the poor behaviour in their classrooms, then that's something I need to be critical about.
In what I've read about you and what I've seen about you in terms of your teaching, you stress the importance of adults modelling standards and behaviour for children. That's a really important value for you. Do you think the Prime Minister is a good role model for children?
No, I do not think so. I don't. I wish he could be, but he isn't. And that is a bit sad. But, you know, I can't get into the ins and outs because I don't know enough about, you know, people say, you know, well, should he be there, should he not be there? I don't know. You know, I like Boris. I don't think he's a bad guy, you know, but I don't know enough about what he's got up to, but I do not think that he's a good role model for children.
What's not good about him? In what way?
Well, his personal life, for instance, that does make me sort of raise an eyebrow. His hair. When I say his hair, we've got strict rules at school. You know, the other day I saw a picture of him in the metro and I looked at his hair and I thought, oh my goodness, you know, we expect our children to have professional looking hair. And I looked at his hair and I thought, gosh, I couldn't put him up on the wall and say, let's all have haircuts like him. Now you might think, oh, that's a bit pedantic and that's a bit silly, but it isn't actually. I think for our children, it's important to look professional. And sometimes Boris looks professional, but sometimes he's not professional enough for me. Let me put it that way.
OK, so family values, because that's a small secret.
The family values, exactly. It's the sort of thing that makes me pause a little bit. Now, and that's not to say he just, you know, and actually I'd say I'm relatively liberal about these things to a certain extent, you know, but he does kind of push the boat out a bit on that.
And character?
Well, and that's where you start. And as I say, I don't know the ins and outs enough about all the recent Partygate stuff. You know, I just don't know the details because I'm too busy working to follow all of that. But it does sort of make you pause and go, You know, I certainly would never be able to put him up and say, be like him. I couldn't do that.
Look, you just did a speech on social mobility. You talked about a fresh approach. I listened to it, and at the heart of it, it seemed to me that your approach is driven through a combination of sort of spreading opportunity more across the country and an individual's own agency to kind of change their lives, rather than talking about sort of structures holding people back and structural inequality. Is that a fair interpretation of what your approach will be in this job?
Yeah. The thing is that we want to look at people who are bucking the trends. How is it that in an unequal society that some people are upwardly mobile? What do they do to achieve that? And so we want to look at them. We also want to look at the ideas around what happens to the many as opposed to the few. Often I think as a society we are pushed to look at the people who start at the bottom and then zoom to the top, and it makes a great Hollywood film. It's romantic, it's wonderful. Look, I grew up with nothing and now I'm this big CEO and I eat expensive dinners. But not all of us necessarily want to do that. And some of us want to have shorter mobilities. And it would be wrong, for instance, someone comes from a home that's where lots of unemployment and then they become a manager at Sainsbury's. Well, isn't that something to celebrate? But often we don't necessarily celebrate these smaller achievements because we only see the huge leap as the success story. And we would like to change the narrative around that, really.
Going on to that idea about the sort of success being defined as, I think you said, a sort of caretaker's daughter ending up in Oxbridge, and it actually being success defined as someone whose parents are unemployed and then have been long-term unemployed and then they get a job, that is their version of social mobility, that maybe Oxbridge is too much, but becoming a manager at Sainsbury's is not, right?
And different people want to do different things. And of course, we've got children at school who are going to Oxbridge, and it's really exciting, and we're 100% behind that. So you don't want to stop doing that, but not everyone can go to Oxbridge, that's all.
But one thing I did want to ask you, though, because I think you went to Oxford, didn't you?
Yeah.
Because when it comes to Oxbridge, the Higher Education Minister said recently that those universities shouldn't discriminate against private school students going to Oxbridge, that there's always, it's tilted too much and they're too focused on getting more state school kids in. What's your view of that?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know how much they're tilting one way or the other. It is important that the places that everyone wants to get into, whether it's the big law firms or it's Oxbridge and so on, it's important that they recognise that they can get talent from all different types of places, and they're not just coming from the private sector, or they're just not coming from the state sector. So they need to keep an open mind, and that's good. But from my point of view, I'm thinking about how can we make sure, as the Commission, how can we make sure as many people as possible are enabled to be able to make a success of their lives, finding a career that they love, which will give them purpose and satisfaction. Because not all of us want to be Prime Minister, not all of us want to be millionaires. And that's good. I mean, you're not Prime Minister and you're very happy doing your job, you know? like, that's the thing. All of us want to do different things. I love being a teacher. I love being at school with the children. So we all need to do what makes us passionate, you know?
What would you like to do in the future? I mean, you're extremely successful professional in teaching. You've now got a public sector role advising the government on social mobility. Is politics something you might want to do one day?
No, never. I mean, in fact, I feel bad us chatting about Boris because at the end of the day, he's just a man and he's taken on a role that I would never do. And I would never do it because I wouldn't want people sitting on a television programme chatting about me in this way. And yet, in that sense, he has sacrificed, you know, and given over his life to do that.
But if you did do it, you could implement your school model across the entire country.
No, that's the thing. You need to win people's hearts and minds. You can't do that. In fact, in many ways, you're very powerless as Prime Minister. I think we misunderstand just how much power a Prime Minister actually has.
Katharine, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.